Greetings, folks. Nice to see you today. My name is Dustin Cormier, and this is How to Rock Astrology. Welcome. Today we're going to be talking about a very important episode regarding what is the Taittiriya Brahmana, and what does it mean to us as modern Vedic astrologers. This is going to be a little bit of a preamble before we get into the energies of the 27 lunar mansions. This one is by Ernst Wilhelm. I also plan on going through the writings of Victakara through his nakshatra, the authentic heart of Vedic astrology, as well as the divine forces of the lunar nakshatras by Radha, as portrayed in the Vedas. This is a big, important part of my whole shtick here, is to convey the importance of the Taittiriya Brahmana scripture in the use of the nakshatras as an integrated astrology, a natal horoscope astrology used in tandem with Parashara, Jaimini, and the tropical rashis of the 12-sign zodiac system. The Taittiriya Brahmana is a very important text that is for our use in having some kind of scriptural authority as to how to use the nakshatras in interpretation. It is important because it is the sole Vedic source that we have to clarify and discern Vedic-oriented authority on the nature of these nakshatras. And the Vedic distinction is the important one, which Victakara will tell you in all of his videos and all of his writings. Basically, I'm going to give this to you as a sort of preamble as to what I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to tell you it. Essentially, it is my hope that this video series on the nakshatras will inform you of the growing movement of tropical Vedic astrologers who avidly use the nakshatras in their readings through the preceding scriptural authority of the Vedic era text, the Taittiriya Brahmana. This includes some of these folks here. I'm more including them because they're tropical Vedic astrologers. Now, there are many things, many cascading movements coming through a video like this. One of them is the tropical Vedic astrology movement. I consider myself in this camp of people who use tropical measurements for the derivation of the planetary positions, who still use and interpret horoscopes through Vedic philosophy and reckoning, the Eastern Vedic model of interpreting a natal horoscope. So that's my style. I don't bring the signs back 24 degrees like the sidereal Rashi astrologers do. My Rashis are configured through tropical measurements of the sun's movement with the Earth's movement with the sun. So that's a whole thing in itself. Feel free to look up Tropical Vedic Astrology if you're interested in that. This video today is poignantly talking about, as a Tropical Vedic astrologer, how do I define my use of the nakshatras? In this whole series, we've been talking about them. This video is particularly talking about the one Vedic scriptural authority of the nakshatras, and that is the Taittiriya Brahmana. The Taittiriya Brahmana comes from the Krishna Yajurveda. It's one of the epic ancient Vedic texts. And now, first thing I should say before I begin is that the discussion of the nakshatras actually goes deeper than the Taittiriya Brahmana and the 27 asterisms that are given in the Taittiriya Brahmana. The Taittiriya Brahmana was a commentary written by rishis on the Krishna Yajurveda, which was purely a Vedic consciousness again which is very distinct from like astrological or astronomical reckoning, because the devatas who inhabit who ideally the energy, the divine consciousness agents who inhabit these nakshatras, actually were talked about in the Vedas and pervade Vedic consciousness before they were quantified into an astrological system which we can grasp them with. So the nakshatras, or more importantly, the devatas of the nakshatras, existed long before the advent of modern natal horoscope astrology. This dates back to the time when divination was really more to do with the moon's daily transit of the 27 lunar mansions. There was a time where nobody really, like, it was harder to conceive of like a birth chart, getting your birth time. You know, we're talking 6,000 plus years ago. In this era, things were really more about horary or prajna astrology, which meant like you just felt how you felt about your karma, and you would come to a guru or astrologer, and the astrologer would say, well, the moon is in the sign of Leo, in the nakshatra, in the star position of, let's say, Magha or whatever it was. And then you would say, well, I'm feeling this way. And the astrologer would say, you've come to me when the moon is here. Okay, well, this probably means this about your journey. And if you're asking this question, it probably relates to this. It relates to something to do with the moon in Magha. That was the gist of astrology at a certain point in time. The nakshatras at this time, they were intuited to represent really what it was is it had to do with the moon spinning around. It had to do with prajna or horary astrology. But even this horary astrology was an intuitive synthesis that synthesized 33 gods into 28 days. What happened here was that it takes the moon about 27 to 28 days to go around the zodiac. That's what made the lunar month in the old days. So what they noticed is that every day, you know, since there's 27, 28 days in a month, what the ancients noticed is that every night the moon would be resting in another of the lunar mansions. And as the story goes, the moon was a male figure, the Lord Chandra, who was one of the many male arbiters of consciousness, because the planets are considered to be male, masculine arbiters of consciousness agency in the Vedic sense, whereas the 27 lunar asterisms, the mansions, are the place, the vessel, the bones which embody the inherent karmic consciousness of the planets, the agents of consciousness. So, the nakshatras were the feminine aspect of the psyche, whereas the planets were the masculine aspect. What was discovered is that where the moon represents this infinite potential of bliss, it's bound to come out in many infinite varieties of different ways. But those different ways had 33 basic narrative plots, shall we say. There were 33 basic elemental narrative plots, which the unfolding narratives of all consciousness are ultimately going to contain some element of, if that makes sense. So there were 33 deities or agents of consciousness, which were the pervading body, the embodiment of consciousness. The 33 psychedelic agencies pervading all consciousness were the 33 devatas of the Vedas, the ancient Vedas. they were like interwoven vertices of any energy grid lines of pure bliss energy intelligence. The 33 gods of the Vedas were essentially the pure crossing energy grid lines of possible things that could unfold in any human story. And from these 33 gods and the stories in the Vedas that talk about these 33 gods, from these 33 branch out the 30 million other gods of the Hindu pantheon. In fact, all the 3 million, 30 million gods of the Hindu pantheon were really just different varieties, different ways, different derivations of these 33 basic primary archetypes and mythos agents. Now, the Vedas gave precedent to these 33 devatas in various prayers and scriptures. That's part of the reason why we know that the 33 devatas were transcribed this way, as having this exact number. There were many scriptures that talked about these 33 devatas, as you're going to discover when you check out the part of this series that goes through this book, The Divine Forces of the Lunar Nakshatras. Now, at the time, before the nakshatras became consolidated into 27, there was 33 of these gods, which the Vedic consciousness at the time just intuited that existed. It's a numerological phenomenon that just was birthed because it's of itself so. Now, people at the time had a goddess-like, various anthropologists have defined that there are three different ages of human conception of consciousness. The first was the Age of Isis, where humanity perceived the gods of nature, the pagan deities that made the world spin. We perceived them as being outside of us, and we had no part in our agency with the spinning wheels of fate. We were bound by our fate in the Age of Isis. We worshipped the devatas. We intuited them. We spoke about them in, like Vedic oratory mantras and songs of ancient Sanskrit derivation would sing praises and hymns and oblations to these 33 basic grid lines of consciousness. We intuited them, and we had a respect for them as if they were agents outside of ourselves. People at the time praised these gods and goddesses and devatas as if we were pawns in their chessboard, which, there's an old Zen phrase that says, first there is a mountain, then there is no mountain, then there is. If we were to translate that to this experience, we would say that the Age of Isis saw the mountain, saw it as something outside of ourselves, and just took it as being something, the energy of the universe was perceived as being one way, which is happening to us. Then there was no mountain, which meant the second stage, which is the Age of Osiris, where man said, no, there is no force or agency outside of myself. I am the only one. I'm the only thing that exists, and now I have the power to change my karma. And then, that's the individuation stage of collective human evolution consciousness, where we gain the power to move the world, to create nuclear energy, to create bombs, to create pleasure and sex and whatever we want. It's in the third age where, once again, then there is just the same old mountain that's ever been. This is when humans realize that there is a mountain, there are devatas, there is divine consciousness that's trying to unfold through us, and we have to get in tune with it. We can't just use our willpower, because then our ego gets in the way of the divine happening of what's supposed to happen. So, it's a cool old derivation, right? Now, at the time, We were looking at the mountain, we were looking at the devatas, the ways of nature, and they seemed to be happening to us, and we worshipped them as such. This is the Age of Isis, where the rain had just happened. We had nothing to do with it. The sun rose in the morning, and all we could do is praise that the sun was going to keep rising. You know, when winter happened and the sun in the northern hemisphere ducked down lower and lower into the south, and the sun disappeared for 3 days at Christmas, and everyone freaked out. Oh my God, the sun has died over the horizon. But then the sun eventually came back up. People just had faith that they worshipped the sun. They worshipped the oncoming of spring and summer. It was not perceived as something we could be a part of. Then the Age of Osiris happened, quote unquote. And this is when humans began to understand that we do play a part in our karma. In the Age of Osiris, let's say around like 4,000 years ago, 2,000, 3,000, 2,000 before Christ, whatever, humanity began to identify with the divine energies that were moving through us and that we were moving through. This is when the concept of natal horoscopes came about, where humankind became aware that we can see our psyche and our karma and our past lives in context with the present. This is when natal horoscopes were erected. We could come to understand our karma and our place in it, and finally, we can conquer our limitations and our ignorance using our divine given intelligence, and we can surrender to the wisdom of the unfolding personality of the Godhead that lies within us. Now we have we are a part of this. And what happened is that humans began to say, okay, if we have a part of this, we can conduct a horoscope, and we must represent a certain part of this spinning wheel of this 33 gods. Now, what happened around this time is they were like, okay, at the time humans saw that we are the embodiment of these devatas, these 33 primary energy consciousness agencies. Now, since this time, purveyors of Vedic astrology have been seeking ways to integrate the 33 gods of the ancient Vedic thought into and with the consciousness of solar astrology. Solar astrology is a whole different thing, whose lordship is ninefold, means the 9 planets, and which operates through tropical planetary house positions around a 12-sign zodiac, which relates tropically, whose signs are created tropically by the relationship of the Earth to the Sun, having most especially to do with the equinoxes. Spring, it beckons the beginning of the sign of Aries, the cardinal sign. All the cardinal signs have to do with the movement of the sun in the sky, which is really an optical illusion. It actually has to do with the Earth's movement around the sun. This is tropical astrology, and it's a completely different thing from this 27 nakshatra divisions of space. So, the question becomes, and the question became at the time, how do we transcribe this operation? Where do we go for scriptural authority in blending the 12-sign astrology with, how do we fit the 33 gods into astrology? Well, they didn't try and squash the 33 gods into the 12 signs of zodiac astrology, because zodiac astrology is a whole different thing. The zodiac astrology really caters to that solar masculine consciousness of the planets. In fact, the planets really are the arbiters of the signs. We know in astrology that For example, the Sun rules Leo. Jupiter rules Sagittarius and Pisces. Venus rules Taurus and Libra. All of the signs are intrinsically, concretely related to the agencies of the planets. And so this is why this has been derived as Hellenistic style solar astrology, based on how the planets are revolving around the sun and how the seasons of Earth reflect on the planetary cycles, the planetary seasons around the sun, etc. So the 12-sign zodiac that we know and love, with the Rashis, the tropical Rashis, etc., is a completely different energy sphere consciousness. It's what powers our solar parts of our energy field. And that is the energy of our energy field. And in some ways, it even provides the shape of it. If you are a Leo rising and your sun is in the 5th house, that sun is going to find experiences that relates to the 5th house. And that's, in a way, a form. Even in Parashara, planetary solar astrology, the planets are considered masculine, and the signs and houses are considered Lakshmi. They're considered to be feminine. But even this masculine and feminine duality of solar astrology is all still yang. It's all still masculine. It's all still solar derived compared to the bones, the soul bones that are described in the astrology of the nakshatras. So, ultimately, still, this doesn't answer our question, what are we going to do with the 33 gods of the Vedas? And how are we going to try and make them integrated with some kind of natal horoscope astrology? Well, what happened historically is, thankfully, the rishis, the seers, which is these people are the arbiters of all things Vedic astrology. All things Vedic astrology are based on rishis, or seers, who intuited the truth of the cosmogony of the universe through their own cells, their own nervous systems. They had no blocks, no mental obscurities or obstructions to the pure vision of the divine within them, which is the divine within all. So they would channel these astrological realities. And what happened is that the rishis uncovered a synchronous wisdom that involves splitting the 360-degree circle of the heavens up into even segments, but which would carry the essence of the 33 gods within it. Now, what kind of happened here is that apparently 33 is not a symmetrical, synthetically, geomantically pleasing numerology for unfolding the true divine beautiful truth of these nakshatra gods. 33 is an awkward number which divides into 360 in awkward ways. Now, the closest thing that apparently can be derived is splitting the 360-degree circle into 27 equal segments, each being 13 degrees and 20 minutes of arc long. This roughly correlates with the 27 days. Not only is this mathematically pleasing, because it fits into 360 degrees, a fitting number of times. I believe that it's... Yeah, it's okay. We don't need to think about that. But not only is it geomantically fitting, numerically, mathematically fitting, but this also roughly correlates with the 27 days it takes for the moon to travel around the sky in the ancient days, in that ancient Prajna electional astrology. Just as the moon would take a new wife every night of the 27-month calendar in ancient days. 3 27 is also very important, I would commend, because it happens to be the numerical of 3 to the power of 3. 3 times 3 is 9, and 9 times 3 is 27. Now, if you know the number 3 is mystically related to all things feminine. The yoni, the vagina, is often considered through the symbology of a triangle. There's many Celtic and other traditions that provide goddess symbols in their culture which relate to triangles. Trines are important. You'll notice that even arches, and they have a certain architectural strength to them, which squares do not have. Squares with their 90-degree angles can easily break in the middle, but a triangle has more syncretic inherent strength with gravity. Honeycombs of bees are made with hexagon shapes, which have a resonance with the number 3. So the number 3 is very important and divine with regards to feminine consciousness. Now, this might come off as a bit arbitrary, and this is kind of the bane of this particular conversation. There are many people who can jump right in on this part of the conversation and say, well, it's still arbitrary. There used to be 28 gods because it was roughly 28 actual days. It was in between 27 and 28 days of the month that the moon would take to go completely around. So it seems like there was a bit of an arbitrary adjusting that had to be done here in order for the nakshatras to have a clean, perfect 27 segments. Now, what prompted the refinement of the 33 devatas to be fitted into the 27 perfectly equal pieces of sky? It appears to be more mystical and geomantically inherent to this divine science. And it was not necessarily arbitrary. The main argument here is that there is a scripture, that being the Taittiriya Brahmana, which, as we shall see, gives what was in the Vedic era. And it was an important bridge from the Vedic era, which conceived of 33 gods, to the Osiris era, the natal horoscope astrology era, which uses natal horoscopes. There was an important bridge moment between these two, and that's what the Taittiriya Brahmana represents. So in our camp, our main argument for those who just say that this whole nakshatra thing is blown up, it's completely, it's derived from a 28 nakshatra system. The fact that it was supposed to be 33 seems to be arbitrarily trying to fit in the 27 equal segments. It seems arbitrary. But we have no, we have to speak to our biases here, folks. We have to speak to our understanding at present. And we have to be clear about, to at least ourselves, let alone to our detractors, about the fact that there's no clear line of scriptural thought clarifying this jump, much to the chagrin of those who know the importance of the nakshatras. It just happens to be in the Taittiriya Brahmana. The nakshatras have always been popular in Indian astrology, and people have just kind of taken it for a superstitious, for granted that it's there. And we know that the closest lines of thought that we have to defining the 27 nakshatra constellations is this particular book, this particular bridge between the Vedic consciousness, which held that there were 33, and the modern nakshatra analysis, which uses 27 equal segments of the sky to define the nakshatras. Our main line of defense in arguing for this is that there is a Vedic text which does distinctly define 27 segments of sky for the nakshatras. Now, this is not an astronomical text, so it doesn't say exactly what segments of sky. This is purely a narrative mythos thing. as I'm going to explain. There's a pervasive movement in astrology which is gaining traction. The main reason the nakshatras have retained their importance to modern Vedic astrologers is one important text, and that is called the Taittiriya Brahmana, which is itself a commentary conspired by the same ancient rishis whose consciousness created the roots of the Vedas. Now, the Taittiriya Brahmana appears to be, it almost reads like a Jyotish Shastra, which is, of course, a very different thing. And it's not Jyotish. Jyotish is the Sanskrit word for Vedic astrology. And astrology, as a practical science, is something completely different from mythos and from philosophy. Although they're wedded, because the way that we apply human psychology through astrology has to fit with the natural unfolding nature of human consciousness, which philosophy would underline, and which philosophy does pertain to. So, ultimately, the Taittiriya Brahmana, it reads as if it were catering to a description of the personality of the nakshatras, and that's what's kind of interesting and special about it. It's kind of a bridge moment. In this moment in history, the Age of Osiris, where mankind started to anticipate that we would need to find a way to understand how we relate to the divine energies of the divine feminine that is the nakshatras and the 33 devatas. When in the Age of Osiris, we needed to find out where we fit in the schema and how each individual's karma must interplay with it all. In this, so, during this Age of Osiris era, probably 4,000, more like 6,000 years ago is when this Taittiriya Brahmana text in particular came about. The Age of Osiris, this individuating human ego principle where we said that we are a part of the divine plan, it got very coated with writers who were passionate about being a part of the unfolding of how to interpret personal horoscope astrology through the ancient 33 gods schema. So many old astrologers were just waxing philosophic about it and describing, why this nakshatra is this way, but it had the personal bias of the authors who were talking about it. Any author today is going to have this bias too, but this is why we're trying to describe for ourselves what is the scriptural authority that we abide by. And in this case, for us, this Taittiriya Brahmana text is very important because its consciousness still had a foot. Its main foot was still in Vedic lore and literature. And this is important because Vedic literature is vastly different from astronomical treatises that came later. Victakara talks about this in all his videos. Astronomy is a matter of math and rational logical faculties, whereas the Veda is a matter of divine mythos from within, the eternal, perennial, recurring patterns of nature, which cannot be derived by mere science alone. Astronomical texts proceed by reason, which is why they're impure compared to these true bones of Vedic literature that are described in the Vedas. It's not to say that the Vedas don't have junk or that they aren't, there's plenty of things that occurred in Vedic consciousness which are not useful to modern consciousness because they're old, they're written in a different era. But that's not to say that, there's so many things from the Vedic era that are perennially timeless. And it's up to us as modern yogis and people interested in the intrigue of ancient culture and anthropology. It's up to us in modern days to discern what is useful from ancient literature and what is useful in a present modern context. So, the there is some junk in the Vedas, but where our scriptural authority regarding the ramparts of divine consciousness and intelligence from scriptural authority, our scripture, the Vedas, when they talk about these characters, it's the old consciousness pervaded by and produced by the rishis, the intelligent purveyors of that psychedelic intuition. They're the ones who hold the mystery of the perennial byways and energy grids of consciousness and the perennial narratives of the human soul. They channeled that and transmitted that, and that is our scriptural authority. Now, the Taittiriya is important because it's sourced in the ancient Vedic rishis, those same people who intuited the original 33 gods. Yet its language seems to impart wisdom of the embodied of a personality of the Godhead, which we are entangled with. When you read, what I mean by this, to put it simply, is that when you read the Taittiriya Brahmana, it reads like an astrological treatise, like the character that is being given in the 27 sutras. You know, there's exactly 27 sutras in this Taittiriya Brahmana script. And the 27 give us the character of a personality that is strikingly human, or can be perceived as, you know, being a part of the natural human psychology. Each line tells us distinctly about, you know, the character of a person who might have important planets positioned in that nakshatra. This text gives us that in a personality, in a horoscope language. Although, you know, like they were intuiting that it would be used this way, it seems. But it is still, again, it wasn't derived from them intuiting, oh, okay, so we've got to make 27 equal divisions in the sky. Now, that means that there's going to be trines. 9 plus 9 plus 9 is 27. So maybe if we have Ashwini here, we're going to make Ashwini in trine with Magga here, and they're going to have some kind of interplay there. You know, they didn't see the trines and intuit it from that astronomical sort of consciousness. Rather, they intuited, according to the theory, they themselves arbitrated, or the divine arbitrated through them, a vision of a 27 segment constellation system that is inherently correct. Again, this is just something that was inherited by the ancient consciousness of the rishis. It's quite distinct and exact, this 27 derivation. There's no ancient zodiac of 28 or 33. There's only this one instance of describing 27. So since this authoritative text appeared thousands of years ago, many clever commentators have taken liberty in intuiting the mysterious reasons for the 27 divisions. And, you know, many talk about how the nakshatras were once inherently wedded to the rashis. We know because of the precession of the equinox that this is not the case. You know, speculation on the nature of the nakshatras is healthy. I'm doing this. We're all right now speculating as to the nature of these nakshatras. And speculation is healthy insofar as we can discern it from proper scriptural sources and reasoning. Every forthcoming text that we read about the nakshatras is subject to speculation, to separate the wheat from the chaff and the cream from the runny milk, meaning it's up to us to discern what scriptures are useful, what doorways and gates can we discern in order to define how we're going to use this 27 nakshatra grid as modern astrologers with modern practical needs and uses as in psychological counseling today. We need to know what's useful and what's not, what's real, what's not, and what is the foundational basis for us using this. So I'm hoping that you'll join us in our present-day research. We need astrologers on every front uncovering their personal take with these lunar asterisms. Thankfully, forerunners like Ernst Wilhelm, Ryan Kirkzak, Vic DeCara, and the like are already lining up their ideas with this epistemology of the Taittiriya Brahmana that I've described. And that's why I'm going to be studying these nakshatras in this series, specifically through the Taittiriya Brahmana. Although I'm also going to I'm going to use Radha's book, and I'm going to try to get, scriptural resources from more than just the Taittiriya Brahmana. But we are going to be leaning hard on the Taittiriya Brahmana because of guys like Ernst and Vic DeCara, who have actually written very succinct books on the subject. The two main ones, as I've said, being Nakshatra, the authentic heart of Vedic astrology, which has great accounts of the 27 nakshatras. Very advanced, but also very simplistic. I would say Vic DeCara has done the most head work in regards to this movement going on, but Ernst Wilhelm's Energies of the 27 Lunar Mansions is also an important primer to give us consciousness regarding what it is that we're dealing with all this stuff. I recommend you check out both, and in my next episodes, I'm going to be talking about these to give us a little bit of a primer and backdrop for how to use the Taittiriya Brahmana's commentary, which you will later hear in my descriptions of the nakshatras themselves. It's my hope that this video series informs you of the growing movement of Tropical Vedic astrologers who avidly use the nakshatras in their readings through the preceding scriptural authority of the Vedic era text, the Taittiriya Brahmana. So I hope that this clarified some things, folks. I know I've been doing a lot of videos on this subject, but I'm just doing the best I can to clarify the present moment of unfolding awareness of this not new, but newly appreciated ancient way of using Jyotish to its fullest potentials. I hope you agree with me. Let me know if you do. Let me know if you don't. My moon sign is Jesta, and I really am here to perpetuate a stance in astrology, but, of course, as Indra, I also know the importance of making a stance, making your point heard, but also letting all the other points be heard, letting other defenses come through, and defending my own stance. This is just the nature of a moment like this in the modern world when many ways of perception are trying to come to the same conclusion about this mystical science of astrology. It's a very wonderful time to be alive. It can be very confusing, it can be hard, because there's so many different ways of describing and defining authority. But the best way, I think, for us to do it is to stand united in our individuation. As the old saying goes, in the highest age of consciousness, all men can blend and still remain inherently what they are. Thanks for watching, folks. Let me know what you thought. I'm Dustin Cormier for How to Rock Astrology. See you soon with more data regarding the nature of the nakshatras. Thanks for watching.